Just gone, so we better get started. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time and coming along, and welcome to November's bite-size briefing, which this month is on the topic of, can I move my telephone system into Teams? There are a few people on the call who are new to bite-size briefings, so I think it might be worth just saying a little bit about them in order to put things into context for you. So we are very lucky at the final step in that we work with some very talented individuals and some very talented organizations, but universally they pretty much all share the same challenge. And actually, Roger, would you mind moving on the slide one for me? Thanks. So these people, they share the same challenge, which is they have to juggle a number of different priorities, and IT has probably come to them without them necessarily being their first love, or they're having a lot of expertise for it. And yet at the same time, they're in a position where they have to make good quality decisions about IT, and they have to justify those to their senior management team. And that's quite an awkward position to be in. So as we work with these companies, they're very focused on developing their business, and they want to make sure that the IT stays in lockstep with that and is actually genuinely supporting them and helping them fulfill their potential. So there are certain elements that we've found that work well in order for us to be able to do this. The first is that we need to talk about business goals. The IT isn't there for IT's sake or to have whizzy IT. It's there to help the company fulfill its potential and achieve those business goals. The second thing is they want us to break down the complexity and simplify that around IT. If we oversimplify it, that introduces risk. If we make it too complex, then it's difficult to follow and it's difficult to make those good quality, well-informed decisions. In terms of making those decisions, we found that a decision matrix is very helpful, and we've used the Eisenhower matrix. What that does is it organizes things by important and by urgent. And then we overlay on the top of that a matrix which decides what is the impact of those business decisions. And so is it a high impact or is it a low impact? And then over the top of that as well, we also layer things about budgets. So what is the cost of achieving that particular task or that particular goal within the organization? We then also find that we have a roadmap and a budget. So this normally works to probably about a 12 or a 36-month target. And really it's to avoid that situation where there are nasty surprises, where you think, oh, well, I wasn't expecting to have to outlay that money and do that project at a time when the business needs to focus on this and doesn't want the disruption. Now, of course, 2020 has been pretty much all about nasty surprises. But again, following another sort of Eisenhower concept, which is that whilst planning is essential, no plan actually survives contact with the enemy. What we found is that actually having a budget and having a roadmap and a plan, actually when things fall apart and you need to be agile, it's very helpful if you've got that plan, because basically you can take it out and you can say, well, this no longer counts, that doesn't count. We absolutely need to raise the priority of this, and it's now also urgent and we need to invest in it. And that is very helpful with making the right decisions at the right time. The final challenge that senior managers have with responsibility for IT is that they're going to need to be accountable for the decisions that they've made and the money that they've spent. And so they like reporting and good ROI, because if they have that, that means that they can have a good answer for their colleagues in the management team and they can explain what has happened. As I say, we work normally on a time frame which is between 12 and 36 months, and there's quite a lot of conversations involved in that. Normally, it will break down to 12 hours for the senior person and 24 hours per year for their deputy. So those are per year figures. And that normally works out with a cadence. It might be spread over, we might meet monthly for a particular period if things are very busy, or we might meet quarterly. So what Bite-Size Briefings tries to do is it tries to take a particular topic and it tries to give you a flavor of all those considerations so that senior people responsible for IT can start to think about actually how does this work. So that is what bite-sized briefings are. We also have other briefings which are actually intended more for hands-on IT. So that's for people who actually use the software more day to day. So before we get on to the question of phones in Teams, it's important to remember that actually Teams and the use of Teams, Teams is a great hub for collaborating and for improving teamwork. You're going to gain more productivity the more you use Teams in various areas. Phones is just one of those. So I thought it would be useful if we just give you a very quick introduction to all the other ways in which it's important to work with Teams in order to get those productivity gains. The first one is people and focus. So you should organize teams you should group people in teams according to what is the business priority, what is the business goal, and what is the function that you want them to perform. Secondly, once you've got the right group and you've got them focused on a particular outcome, you then want to pool knowledge around that outcome. You want to avoid the situation where actually what happens is somebody starts working on something, they didn't realize that there was already a template existing, or somebody had made a start that was very similar on another project, and actually they could have saved themselves a lot of time. Or they know that something exists, but they just can't find it. Teams is actually very good at surfacing those conversations and surfacing the information so that it can be shared and used. Productivity, or doing more in less time. Teams has a really impressive tool set. There is all the Office applications, which most people know. There are a lot of Office, other Microsoft applications outside of the normal Office suite, which can also be used, which are incredibly useful at turning data into information. And then there's actually a very large marketplace within Teams where third-party software will integrate. So there are a lot of tools at your disposal. There was a survey last year that came out that Forrester conducted, and they estimated that information workers can save up to 4 hours per week if they apply Teams correctly and they build it around the workflows that they want to use. And that same survey actually showed that actually companies make better and quicker decisions if they employ Teams in the right way as well. Teams is really strong at that meeting life cycle. So where you have regular meetings on a given topic or a given project, and you have to plan, review and do and set next steps. It's very strong in that area, and it collates all that information and the conversations that go on outside those meetings. It brings all those together. In fact, the Forrester survey had a number of quotations from people who discovered that actually they were having fewer meetings because the quality of the conversation outside of meetings was so good that they were actually able to make decisions and move on much quicker. The other element is collaboration, and that sort of brings us back to the people element. But actually, the point about this collaboration is the device. The buzzword in our industry, or the buzz phrase, is anytime, anywhere, on any device, that you can work on the device of your choosing at the time of your choosing. And actually, Teams integrates with a considerable number of devices. So you can work on a small tablet with a digital pencil, or you can dedicate an entire conference room in your office to Teams, and you can have whiteboards and touchscreen displays up in your office. It really is a very comprehensive solution. So what tends to be the sort of forgotten element of all that is security, which you can sort of see highlighted in red there. But it shouldn't really be an afterthought, as the GDPR phrase has it. I think you should put security in by default and by design, which means that at every step of your team's development, you should actually consider, how do we keep our data secure, and how do we keep the data that we hold in client safekeeping secure? Okay, so that's the whistle-stop tour of bite-sized briefings and the overall view of Teams. Let me hand over now to my colleague Raja, who is going to take you through actually the meat of today, which is about phones and Teams.
Thank you, Simon. First thing I want to say is thank you to all of you who've joined us, because I know you must be preparing for lockdown 2 if you're in England starting tomorrow, or if you're in Wales, you're already well into this. Here's the reality of where we are with this pandemic. Unfortunately, this pandemic is here to stay, and what it really raises is uncertainty. And we're all trying to work out, what do we need to do with our businesses? I think what we have to do is that we have to adapt like we did in March, except in March, it was very much do it as quickly as you can. And we just scrambled to make sure that we could work remotely. And I think a lot of people in March thought, well, actually, by the time it gets to September, October, schools will restart and we'll all be back to normal. But the reality now is that we are facing a long-term problem, and we all have to work out what we need to do with our businesses over the next 3 to 5 years. For me, that's a realistic timeframe that you need to think about. It's very, very clear that IT is critical, and it can really help to drive a company forward. But unfortunately, it doesn't often work that way. The reality is the projects actually take too long, they cost too much, and they don't deliver on the promises. It's very much a case of over-promising and under-delivering. Simon has said we're addressing only a small part of the bigger picture here. But ultimately, what we have to do in this time period is do more with less. And the reality is that we're going to be remote working, either in a hybrid scenario or completely remote working for the foreseeable future. So the fundamental issue is do more with less. And let's have a look at how teams can help with that. We are talking about communication. That's the fundamental issue. And it is really important that we all communicate clearly and succinctly, both with our colleagues and our clients, as well as the broader community and suppliers and so on. Here's something that we all know, that if we don't communicate properly, we know that that's when things end up being a problem. But what's the reality with communication these days? The reality with communication these days is that we have way, way too many channels of communication. So we have email, both work email and personal email. We're using some kind of instant chat function. So whether it's WhatsApp or Inside Teams or Cisco WebEx Teams, there are so many notifications that come up. And we also have to deal with voicemail and phone calls and Outlook just reminding us of all the things that we should have done. What this does is that it hampers your effort to, as a lot of my clients say, is do some real work, because you spend all your time monitoring and managing these channels of communication. The reality is that the deluge of communications that we have don't actually make our lives any easier, and it doesn't help with the fundamental problem of doing more with less. So what's the way forward, and how do we fix this problem? And Simon alluded to it earlier, that one of the things that we have to do is simplify complexity. So I think what we really need to do is think through which channel is appropriate for a given type of communication. Because right now, what happens is that anybody communicates with the thing that's easiest to communicate with. And you have to educate and train your staff so that they follow the guidelines that you set. And what you have to do is get people doing real work. A lot of my clients say is that they get up early or they go to bed late because at the start of the day and late in the evening is when they do their real work, because they haven't got this bombarding of communication to them. So in this webinar, we're going to be looking at a very small component, which is the voice component, and how do we integrate the voice into a broader picture of communication, the unified communication that you might have heard the buzzword, and how do we bring that into teams, and is it actually even worth doing? So when we talk to our clients, we find that there are 3 most common scenarios when it comes to voice. Let me go through these for you now. The first system is that clients are using a traditional phone. And what I mean by that is, traditional phone lines, you might know them as ISDN or PSTN lines, and they have a traditional phone system. So there's probably a box in the wall, and it's sometimes referred to as the PABX or the PBX. When we went into lockdown 1, what a lot of these companies did with these traditional phone systems is that they just set an immediate divert from the phone system to the mobile. Yes, it worked. And the reality now is those companies know, actually it worked, and we had to do a very quick and dirty solution when we went into lockdown 1. But for lockdown 2, you know that this solution isn't fit for purpose. Excuse the ambulance or police car going by. We're right in the center of London in Tavistock Square, and that's one of the hazards that we have to put up with. Here's a fact that most people may not know. That BT and Ofcom have already said that when it comes to December 2025, all of these traditional phone lines are going to be switched off. And there is going to be a drive to switch to fully digital or internet-driven phone lines. You might be familiar with the term VoIP or internet connections. So that really is scenario 2. We find companies who are already on VoIP or internet phones, as they call them. However, the reality is that they've had less than a stellar experience with these things. The biggest problem that we get reported is poor call quality. The second problem is that they're too difficult to use. And the reality is that the cost savings that were promised at the outset have not actually been realized. There is no integration with other systems like Zoom or Teams or your file system or anything like that. And here's what happened in lockdown. In lockdown, that you realized that the internet connection was the key thing. And actually the VoIP system worked better when you were in the office. And there was a real drop in call quality when everybody started working remotely. The other issue is that people didn't really understand how the systems worked. And so when they had to transfer calls and do fancier things like conference calling, there was a real lack of understanding of how do I do this with this system. The reality of what happened is people often reverted back to their mobiles. And obviously that is then dependent on how good a mobile connection were you getting at home. So where are we now? Often companies in this second scenario, they often wish that they hadn't made the move to VoIP because the headaches are just too difficult. And the client experience has been less than stellar for lockdown 2. Scenario 3 is companies that have already made the switch to integrated communications, and they already have internet phones, and they have made the jump, or at least started on that journey of integrating it into a broader picture like Microsoft Teams. So the reality in this scenario is it was supposed to be an all singing, all dancing system when you put it in. And however, it has proved to be not quite so integrated. No one really knows where the calls are going or how to use that integration. And over a period of time, people have reverted back to their old method of working. And this integrated system is slowly making its way towards becoming a white elephant. Simon mentioned security. The people who are responsible for IT and communications within organizations are realizing, actually, is this another source of where our systems are less secure than they need to be? So if we look at those 3 scenarios, the first thing I want to ask you is, where exactly is your company today? So Simon, if you could run the first poll, and you're going to have 6 options here. The first one is scenario 1, which is we're just using the traditional phone system. The second scenario is we've made the jump to VoIP. The third scenario is we're already in internet communications. Fourth thing is that we are transitioning to VoIP. And the fifth one is we're transitioning to an integrated comms solution. You may not know this because you're not in charge of IT or communications in your company, and that's fine. I'm quite happy for you to click the don't know option. At least you're familiar with the 3 things. Actually, that's an interesting split. It's a pretty even split that I'm seeing that between we are on a traditional phone system and we are making a jump to VoIP. I'm going to end the polling now and I'm going to move on. For you to understand this a little bit more, I'm going to go through three case studies. But before I do that, I'm quite sure that you are wondering, okay, we can all see that scenario one, the traditional phone lines, is pretty much rapidly becoming obsolete. And you're wondering, what's better? Should I go to scenario two, which is the internet phones VoIP solution, or should I just leapfrog and go straight to scenario three, which is the integrated communication solution? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is it depends. And here are the kind of things that you need to think about. Where are you currently? So for example, what contractual obligations does your company have to the existing phone system? We reviewed a system for one of our clients and they were on a traditional system. And the reality is that 18 months ago, they had signed up to a 5-year agreement. And I had to advise them to say, the very first thing that we need to do is find out what your contractual obligations are and what you need to do to get out of that. Because if you're in a binding contractual obligation and you are stuck there, then you have to look at how can we break that. I think once you know where are you now, the second question you have to ask yourself is, where do you want to get to? Where do you want to get to over the next 12 months, over the next 2 years, 3 years, and over the next 5 years? I've alluded to this already. I think the reality in this pandemic is the first thing that we have to do is we have to work out how do we survive. But once we've done that, we've got to work out how do we actually thrive. Third thing you need to have a look at is what impact does this have on your costs, both on capital expenditure, if you need to replace all handsets, headsets, etc., and also on your operational expenditure, things like call costs and so on. The big one that's difficult to estimate, but actually here is where you get the most return on investment, is what impact will this have on our productivity? Think about what advantage does it give you in terms of competitive advantage? What impact does it have for your clients? All of these considerations come into is going for a VoIP solution, scenario 2, the best option, or is going for a fully integrated solution, integrating your phone system into Teams, the integrated comms solution, the best one. I'm going to go through 3 case studies for clients that we've helped recently, which will indicate to you the thought process that they went through. And I'm going to talk about lockdown 1 and how they dealt with it and what position they're in for lockdown 2, which is starting tomorrow in England. So case study 1, for obvious reasons, I'm not going to use any names. But here is where the client was at the start of lockdown 1. They were primarily office-based, and they had a traditional phone system with traditional handsets and traditional phone lines, no soft phones, no headsets. And when they were out of the office prior to lockdown, they were essentially just using their mobiles. So out of the office, use mobiles, come into the office, use the phone system. They were on old contracts. Luckily, they were out of their contractual obligations. However, it was pretty clear that they were paying more for their calls and their lines than they needed to. But at the end of the day, they were busy getting on with their work. It wasn't important enough to attend to it. What happened? We got into lockdown, and what did they do? They went for that solution of let's just forward all our calls to our mobile and deal with it. But when they asked us to review it, we went through an analysis and sat down and talked to them about saying, what exactly are your requirements? And here is what they replied. They wanted a flexible solution that would work from anywhere. And the key thing for them was that they needed to be really responsive to clients. The primary communication method for their clients was the telephone, and they needed good call routing to put it from one internal person to another person if they weren't the right one to deal with the problem. Of course, in the office, it was very straightforward. They all knew how to do that. But once they went remote, it became very difficult. And they had to say, one of my colleagues will call you back. They didn't have a requirement to integrate with any of their line of business applications. So they had a very specialist piece of software, but they needed no integration between the phones and that specialist piece of software. And What they wanted was they wanted better working conditions. So they wanted to use headsets, particularly when you're at home, you might be permanently on your laptop. The solution we gave them was we moved them to a VoIP solution, and we analyzed what is the broadband connection that every employee had at their home, particularly with their key employees, the directors and the managers. They needed professional quality headsets for everybody, and everybody got a soft phone, but the key people also got hard phones, a physical phone at home. They wanted call recording and reporting so that if there was ever anything that they needed to review, they could go back and look at the listen to the call recording. And they wanted to get a better handle on cost control. You know, in the old scenario, they knew their costs were expensive, but it was not a big enough problem or a high enough priority to do something about it. So we put all of that into place. They're now on a VoIP solution. And where are they going into lockdown? They're in a good place. It is very easy to transfer calls from one person to another, irrespective of whether they're in the office or not. And actually, the client is now contemplating, let's give up the lease on the office entirely and let's go fully virtual. And they've got their communications to a point where it works irrespective of where they are, which comes back to that central theme of we need to do more with less. Case study 2, this client was primarily office-based. Again, the difference here was that they were already using VoIP. They already had internet phone calls, as it were. However, their system was not fit for purpose. The call quality was poor and call routing was difficult. And they really weren't using it outside the office. So there were no soft phones, and the receptionist handled all of the calls. Their current provider was very reactive in their support and didn't ever come to them proactively and say, hey, here is how working practices have changed. Here's how we need to help you and support you through this change management process. When we looked at their analysis, what they told us is, we don't want calls going directly to the senior people in the company. Their time is very valuable. We don't know whether it's a sales call or whatever, and the calls will always be fielded. They have 2 receptionists, and calls are fielded by the receptionist, and then it goes through to the key people. However, they wanted flexibility, irrespective of whether they were at the office or at home, or a hybrid solution where some people are in the office and some people are at home, and they wanted to switch to a soft phone solution. They wanted a provider who was far more responsive in support. So when we reviewed their existing system, their configuration, how many numbers did they have, how many lines did they have, etc., what we worked out is that they had several old lines and old numbers that nobody in the company knew what those lines were in place for, or where those calls went, or anything. So the whole cost control piece had kind of crept away and it had got out of control. Now, whereas the first client wanted full transparency on who was doing what and what call they were handling, our second case study, they wanted full privacy. So when someone was on a call, nobody should know, are they on an internal call, an external call, etc. They wanted much better end user training and documentation. So we left them on VoIP. We didn't go to the fully integrated solution because, again, they didn't want that, but they wanted a much better system. So we left them on VoIP and we got the system working how the client wanted it to work. And we had lots of testing opportunity through lockdown 1. So where are they in lockdown 1? The reality is that the majority of people had drifted back into the office, but now that they're going into lockdown 2 and everybody was going fully remote again, the system just adapted and everybody knows how to use it, and the productivity has not been impacted. So they're in actually a good position to go back into the office, and they're in to go back home. And they're also in a good position to come back to the office when lockdown 2 slowly starts disappearing. And the reality is that we put a fit for purpose solution in place, which was much more flexible, much more robust, and we got a grip on their costs in terms of unused numbers, etc. Case study 3 was what we refer to as a greenfield opportunity. So the client came to us and said, I know we're going into lockdown, but I'm about to set up a new business. This has been in the planning for a long period of time. And right now, we have no existing lines, we have no existing numbers, we have no staff, and we don't have an office. However, the founder had a very clear idea on what are the key factors that would help the new business to succeed and what the plan was. They definitely wanted to be ahead of the competition. And the guidelines we got is we will be getting an office, it will be in the city, but we need to allow for full remote working, whether it's at a client site or at home or in our own office. The key thing that we were told to focus on was productivity. And due to the nature of their work, security was paramount. We were given clear guidelines about the type of staff that were coming in. They were going to be IT literate, but they were keen to learn new working practices, new technology, and new ways of doing things. So we had an opportunity here to obviously go down the VoIP internet lines option, but come up with a fully integrated solution. Given the requirement for productivity and security, we based everything on a Microsoft-based solution. So Teams was critical, and the phone system was integrated into Teams for both incoming and outgoing calls. All of their data was held within the Microsoft environment. So use of OneDrive for Business, use of SharePoint, use of OneNote, and use of Microsoft Teams. There were clear guidelines that everything needed to go via Teams. So for instant messaging, as well as for voice calls and for video conferencing calls, everything was integrated into Teams, and it allowed the option of when we're going to call a meeting, actually we can run an agenda document that everyone can contribute to directly inside the Teams environment. You can see here this tight collaboration meant that productivity was obviously high. We based the solution on a Windows 10 based laptop, but they were keen on using iPhones, but the solution would have adapted just as well for Android phones. And they were also going to use iPads. So the Teams environment was set up for the iPhone and for the iPad and for Windows 10. And of course, when you do something on one device, so if they were in a taxi and they were doing something on Teams on their iPhone, and when they got to their destination and fired up the laptop, all of that data would be synchronized. I'm very pleased to report that that business has launched. It launched during lockdown, and it is now thriving, and they are very ready for lockdown 2. The organization has 3 partners, a chairman, 2 analysts, and 1 support staff. It is simplified billing, and which gives much easier cost control. And everyone is working as an integrated team, irrespective of where they are, whether they're at home or in the office or at a client site. And the reality is the reports we're getting back is that people are not wasting time either faffing about trying to get other people on a call or even just doing work that they're not supposed to do. So now that I've explained these scenarios, and I know that you are in a mix of a traditional phone system or on a current VoIP solution, I just want Simon to do a quick poll and say, what do you want to do? Do you want to redo the VoIP internet calls because you don't need that rich integration, i.e. just do scenario 2 much better as case study 2? Or is it you want to get to scenario 3 and let's make Teams central and make Microsoft the Microsoft stack central to the productivity? Again, you may not be in charge of IT, or you may not have a broader picture of the business, and it's fine to say that you don't know. Just going to give you a few more seconds to answer that. Interestingly, the weighting in this case is more towards we want to get to a fully integrated solution. Oh, a few more people have now voted. Balance has switched a little bit to the, we want a reliable VoIP solution. Okay, it's pretty split. I'm going to end that. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, well, actually, what does costs and what does return on investment look like? So just for this presentation, I gave you 3 case studies, and I've just put together some very simple figures that I would like you to go through, that I'd like to go through with you. So let me just show you that now. So the question we're trying to answer here is, is this actually worth doing? Here's what happened in case study 1. That first line you can see is the number of staff. So in case study 1, we had 15 staff. In case study 2, it was a bigger organization. There were 40 staff. And in case study 3, it was a brand new organization with a view to getting to 10 members of staff by the end of year 1. And as I've said, they've already made good progress on that. The second thing we did was that we looked at current costs. What are your existing line costs? What are your existing system support costs? Maintenance agreements and the like. And for case study 1, it was just over £9,000. For case study 2, it was £16,000. And for case study 3, they didn't have an existing system, so it was not applicable. When we looked at what does it cost to put the new system in, year 1 typically costs more than year 2. You have the cost of change, as we call it. For example, in case study 2, we completely refreshed all of the handsets and put in 4 conference phones into their 4 meeting rooms. And in case study 3, whilst we didn't have the cost of physical handsets, we did have the cost of setup and making sure that Teams was fully integrated. And typically in year 2, because you don't have those setup costs, the costs obviously go down. We asked the clients to estimate, now that you have the new system in place, roughly how much time do you think you are saving your staff? And in case study 1, they said, you know what, the new system just works easier. We're not playing telephone tag. We can transfer calls, etc. We're probably saving 1 hour per day per user. Just to make life easy, I have used a cost of £50 per user per hour. And actually, if you go through the overhead costs, etc., in your company and people's time and salary costs and so on, that £50 per hour is a pretty prudent estimate. Case study 2 said, actually, you're saving our senior managers time. The call routing and so on happens very well. We have the call recording, etc. You're probably saving about 1.5 hours a day. The interesting thing on case study 3 is that they said, now that we have all of the data integrated and it's a rich experience and people really aren't wasting time in finding stuff, and we always have the latest version for everything and so on, and they were basing this on their experience in their previous employment, they were saying, you're probably saving 3 hours of time a day, when previously we would be playing telephone tag and is everyone there? Does everyone have the agenda? Does everyone have the meeting pack and so on? And all of that time has been saved. Just the simple thing that we're looking at the latest version of something has made a massive difference. And they estimated that it probably saves them about 3 hours a day. And the bottom line, yes, these are, very rough approximates, and your own case studies will be different, but it's worth going through this kind of ROI calculation, even if it's a back of a napkin type calculation, and working out what do I have to gain. You can see what a difference that changing to the new system and paying attention to how do we do communication has made to these organizations. So where do you go from here? Even if you don't decide to do anything, please do the following, which is assess where you are now, what your contractual obligations are, and where your current costs are. For the majority of cases, you will find, you know what, we've got some lines that we don't need. We've got some numbers that we don't need. We're paying for additional features that we don't need. Maybe our calling plans aren't appropriate. We call to international numbers, or we spend most of our time on mobiles and the plan is not set correctly. Even if you go through that where are our existing costs exercise, you will find that you will make some savings. And remember the priorities I set out for this pandemic. First thing you need to do is we all need to make sure that we survive through this pandemic, but it's not enough just to survive. You need to thrive. The second thing is really work out, where do you want to get to? Where do you want to be in 12 months' time, this time next year? Where do you want to be in 2 or 3 years' time? And long term, what does the strategy look like for your business for 5 years? Once you've worked that out, work out, what does the project plan look like? Who in my organization needs to be involved? Who's the one who's going to drive this thing forward? It does need a champion on your side, because if you don't pay attention to things like the softer side of things, like training, etc., the softer side of things like training, you will find that things will creep back to the previous ways of doing things, and the new thing that you put in will turn into a little bit of a white elephant. There are lots of gotchas in this game. First of all, make sure you don't sign up to contracts that have horrible clauses in them, whether that's in the duration of the contract, or in giving notice periods, or in committing to costs that you really don't need to commit to. Be very aware of process and pitfalls. So one of the things that always causes a problem is number porting, and making sure that you are aware of the process and what happens on that day, and that you don't lose your numbers is really important. We went through this process for our own organization last year. And one of the things I was very clear about, guys, back in the year 2000, we got our phone number. It's 020-7572-0000. It would be a major problem if we lose that 0000 number. So make sure that the number porting goes through correctly. And your own number, it's on your website, it's on your stationery, all your old clients have it, all your suppliers have it. So making sure that things go smoothly is really important. The point of this slide and DIY, we moved into our house at home 20 years ago, and I thought then, you know what, this DIY thing can't be that difficult. I must be able to do some of it. I actually tried to change the front door lock, and it was a disaster. And Simon found this picture for me, and I thought, yeah, you know what, if I tried to do DIY, that's how it would end up. Steve, my technical senior colleague in the company, he's very good at this stuff and he can do it. But for you, if you are not familiar with all of the gotchas and the contractual obligations, don't try and do it yourself, because you will end up in a kind of situation that you can see there with that drawer. Go and get help from a professional company externally. Ultimately, here is what you are trying to do. You are trying to fix that communication problem. You know that communication is key, whether it's for your clients, internally, suppliers, etc. And you know that it makes a massive difference to that productivity equation, and that in this time period, we need to do more with less. Before I end this, I want to tell you a little bit about the final step and why I started this company. I started this company way back in July 1987. This is the only thing I have done in the last 33 years. So we have a wealth of experience in IT. I can actually go through this in the sense that actually when we first started, networks weren't that obvious. Then we went through the year 2K problem. We went through email and introducing that. We went through switching the transition to cloud and doing things in the modern way like phone lines. It's very much a personal thing, and I treat the final step as my own little baby, as it were, of 33 years old. And we have helped clients succeed in their businesses. I would say the thing that I'm most proud of is that we still have clients from year one of trading. And every year we have gone through them and reviewed their IT and put together a roadmap with the budgets, etc., and told them, here's where IT is going in the next 3 years. Here are the bits that you need to pay attention to because it'll make a difference to your company. Here are the bits that you can ignore. Don't get caught up in all the hype. But we're a very small company. We are based in central London. There's only 20 of us, and we take it very, very seriously. And even when we have had to review our existing client setups, we have done well in that process. I'm now going to hand back to Simon to just close that. And I just want to thank you for your time, because I know you must be getting ready for lockdown 2 at the moment. Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. So I mentioned at the beginning that the point of the bite-sized briefings is to help you make well-informed decisions about IT, things that will strategically move your company forward. You're very welcome to ask us any questions that you may have in the chat, but for some people that's just not a rich enough way to communicate, particularly given the topic that we're in at the moment. And so we offer a route map call, which is a chance to speak to us for about 15 minutes, and you can address actually the understanding of where you are now, clarify what is the solution that I do want to get to, and actually what would the roadmap or the plan to get me there kind of look like. And you can actually have a much richer conversation with us about what might be required. So I'm just going to, there's a poll which I'm just launching now, and you've got the option to say, yes, I'd like a call, or no, thank you, I wouldn't. I was noticing, thank you very much for everybody for their poll answers, by the way. I was noticing, I believe that some people who are on the webinar are IT managers, which is great. Thank you for coming along. You may want a slightly different type of conversation rather than that one. That's fine if you do, if you just say yes in the response, and then you can put in the chat, actually, I want to talk about this a bit more, or when we arrange the call, we can arrange something slightly different. So I'm just going to give people just a minute or two to have a look and answer that, and to possibly raise any questions that they may have in the chat. But if there aren't any questions, then we can end the webinar very soon. Just having a look. Just going to give people a little bit more time. Okay, well, if that is everything, thank you very much for attending and for giving us your time. We really appreciate it. We hope that we'll see you on another bite-sized briefing in the near future. And thank you very much. And I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you and goodbye.